Come out with your hands up. Let the boy go out first. Don't do anything rash. I bet our neighbors really enjoyed all the free entertainment we were responsible for. There are police cars everywhere, and they are all pointed at the house where my son and I have been living in secret until now. Pistols, assault rifles, and one man in a suit with a megaphone trying to tell me what to do. I remembered where it all started. Trudy, Darren, and I have been friends for a long time, since middle school. It was usually me with Trudy and Darren with someone else on double dates. It wasn't unusual for Darren and his date to leave us early so he could take his girlfriend to the parking lot. Darren was a charmer with a manly instrument that made guys jealous at heart. I joked to him that he could fuck the guy's wife in front of him and convince the husband that he was saving his wife's life and make the husband thank him. And I wouldn't rule out the possibility that one day he might actually try to do it. Of course, he tried to pester Trudy several times, despite our friendship, and loved to dance various dances with her. Trudy laughed when I asked about his advances on her, and she replied, "I don't understand how any girl could be so stupid as not to understand that all he's interested in is getting into her panties. Trust me, Andy, Darren is the last person you need to worry about to seduce me." We remained close friends for many years. Darren and I went to college and majored in business. Trudy majored in accounting. She said being able to create a balanced spreadsheet was rewarding. To each his own. My father helped me get started in the wine business, and Darren and Trudy invested in it. Based on the amount of money each put in, I had 40% of the business, Darren had 40%, and Trudy had 20%. I was the head of operations, Darren was in charge of sales and marketing, and Trudy did the accounting. It took us a few years to become profitable and a few more to become very profitable when the wine craze took off. Trudy and I put off having children until we sorted out our finances. I told her that we were close to the time when she could stop taking the pills. She didn't seem as excited as I expected. One night, there was a knock on our front door. I looked through the peephole. It was the police. When I opened the door, a male officer asked, "Are you Andrew Miller?" "Yes." "Andrew Miller, you are under arrest for embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." "Waste. I own part of the business. How could I appropriate myself?" I turned to Trudy, whose face showed betrayal. "Andy, how could you?" Darren and I didn't want to believe it, but an independent audit proved it to us. "I can't believe you took advantage of your wife and best friend. It's all over with you and me. You will be served with divorce papers in prison. My life turned into hell in 2 minutes." I was speechless. Then I realized it. I started laughing. "Trudy, you and Darren made me really believe it. Darren and his pranks be damned." The police officer spoke. "I assure you, sir, this is not a joke. Now put your hands behind your back." He treated me quite rudely, so I pulled away from him. Bad move on my part. Before I knew it, I was on the floor and handcuffed, with no regard for my comfort. He jerked me up and finished reading my rights. Trudy stood with crocodile tears streaming down her face. The enormity of her betrayal was only now hitting me in full force. I realized that she and Darren were working together to get rid of me for several reasons. I barely made it into the cell when I was handed divorce papers. Since I allegedly embezzled funds from the business, she wanted my full 40% of the business instead of half in the divorce. In exchange, she will not demand alimony and will pay for the house. When and if it were sold, I would receive half the equity as the mortgage was to date. I wasn't surprised when Darren came to visit me. Andy, you stupid, gullible son of a bitch. Trudy and I have been lovers for a long time. It doesn't matter that you didn't embezzle the money. We have the evidence to put you in jail for a long, long time. Even if you quit, you don't have a job at the company. Right now, Trudy and I control 60% and will get 100% if you sign the papers. Even if you disagree, we will have 80% after the divorce if the 50-50 rule applies. As the head of one of the leading companies in this field, I have the influence to make life in prison easier or more difficult for you. It depends on you. By the way, Trudy says hi to you. As he left, he laughed. I refuse it to sign, but Darren somehow tracked the divorce rate and I got divorced at around the same time the trial started. Even though I was innocent and knew who falsified the books, Darren, Trudy, and the so-called independent auditor all stated that I had embezzled over $500,000. I had no way to prove that. This was not the case. Darren or Trudy opened a bank account in my name in the Cayman Islands, where I allegedly hid the money. Darren pretended to forgive me, asking for leniency as the money was returned. I remained in prison and was sentenced to 10 years. Darren and Trudy got married a week after our divorce. 6 months later, I heard that Trudy had given birth to a baby boy, supposedly 2 months premature. He weighed 3.3 kilograms. I remembered my developmental psychology class well enough to smell something fishy. If the baby wasn't actually premature, that means it was conceived while Trudy and I were still having sex. He could be my son. I was in no position to demand a DNA test, but I quickly understood why Darren might be in such a hurry to divorce me and he and Trudy to get married. What the hell could I do about it while I was in prison? I tried to find a way to tolerate prison life. Then COVID happened. Thank God. Not that I want anyone to die from this. Well, maybe Darren and Trudy. Given the risk to people living in congregate settings, our governor commuted the sentences of all nonviolent offenders. I was free, but I was afraid of what Darren might do to me once I got out of prison. Instead of taking the prison van to the rehab center, I called a taxi. When they opened the taxi door, I ran up to him and told him to drive as quickly as possible. We drove in circles, retraced our steps, and went down a narrow alley before I was sure no one was watching us. I bought some clothes from some hobo and headed to the homeless tent city that had sprung up on the main streets of the city center. The conditions were terrible and unsanitary, so no one dared to bother me there. However, I had to learn to breathe through my mouth. During the day, I kept the beard but cleaned myself up and put on better clothes while I looked for a place to stay for the night where I could hide. I found a nice old lady who was renting out a room, mainly to have someone nearby for safety reasons. It wasn't the nicest area, but after living there for 40 years, she had no intention of moving. Her son took part in the interview with me. I passed his test. He also owned a lawn mowing and leaf raking business and employed workers. Soon I had a job wearing clothes I didn't usually wear. In a body that had lost over 30 pounds in prison, and with facial hair that I had never had before, which was dyed along with the hair on my head. I doubted that many people who knew me before prison would recognize me. After working at this job for a couple of months, I asked my boss if I could go out looking for new business on rainy days. He said, "Of course." I headed to my old neighborhood. I went to houses that were close enough to my old house that I could tell who was coming and going. I once offered to mow lawns for free to help this man's business. I'm lucky. Our longtime neighbor, Mrs. Atwater, didn't recognize me. We mostly just waved to each other when I lived there, and she also had poor eyesight, macular degeneration. The Jarvises were new to the area and had never met me anyway. From these two houses, I was able to figure out Darren and Trudy's basic daily routine. Trudy stayed home with her son instead of working at the winery. I mentioned to Mrs. Atwater that I wanted to reach out to the neighbors about mowing their lawn, but since they had a small child, I wanted to make sure I wasn't disturbing his sleep. She told me that Trudy said that Brian, their son, always went to take a nap after his 10 a.m. feed. She also mentioned that Trudy was sleeping then too. This would be the wrong time to bother them, she said. However, this would be the perfect time for me to do what I wanted. One day, while Trudy and the baby were out, I looked around the house and yard as if I was putting together an estimate for lawn mowing services. Although I had lived in this house for many years, I wanted to see what had changed. Since I was now a familiar sight in the area, no one said anything. I was aware of some shortcomings in the house. One downside was the reliability of the sliding patio doors. They had to be closed carefully or they would not lock properly. If I could fix it without anyone noticing, I could sneak around that way later. The next day, I put my revenge plan into action. I was glad to see that no one noticed me fiddling with the sliding doors. I entered the house and headed to the child's room. First, I checked Trudy's room and heard her snoring. I felt a rush of nostalgia when I saw my wife lying peacefully in bed. I went to the baby's room and turned off the baby monitor. I brought a bag to put the baby's things in it. I put the baby in a special backpack, which essentially served as a changing carrier, so that he would not wake up. It worked. I headed to the car I drove. It was a cheap car that I bought unregistered from a junk dealer. After putting the baby in the stroller, I headed to a motel in the next town. I immediately took a DNA test and paid for an expedited report. There was no way I was going to kidnap someone else's child. It was an agonizing wait. The results delighted me. The boy was mine. I renamed him Jason. I didn't wait long to set off into unknown lands. As you might imagine, I was a direct suspect in the kidnapping. The problem was that Andy Miller no longer existed thanks to some contacts I made in prison. I even had a birth certificate with my first name and the last name of my son, as well as my wife, Leila. I bought myself a Leila. The girl I contracted to become my wife was once a teenage runaway who had been in prison many times and had been to drug rehab twice. She had just gotten out of rehab and was back into prostitution to make a living. She jumped at the opportunity to start over. Sharing a bed with me was not a big deal for her. She said that she wanted to have sex with just one man for a change. We drove a car with a fake registration and a borrowed license plate until we found a town where people seemed to stay out of each other's business. Maybe they brought in a lot of people from the Witness Protection Program. WPP was supposed to be our cover if we felt someone was getting too nosy or found something wrong with our IDs. I learned that there was no large lawn mowing business in town, so I opened my own business. Leila managed the office and maintenance side of the business. She knew about engines from her brothers, so it didn't take me long to teach her about the most common problems with lawn mowers and how to fix them. This job allowed her to take care of Jason in the workshop. We have become an integral part of a close-knit community. After a few years, we began to relax, although we never completely let our guard down. From time to time, we heard about the kidnapping of a small child from the poor Edwards family, Darren and Trudy. A large reward was offered for his safe return. The reward was so great that there was one couple who, after no one had found the boy for over a year, tried to marry off their own son to get the money. Although Darren and Trudy didn't think it was their son, they took a DNA test to prove it for sure. The boy's DNA did not match either Darren's or Trudy's DNA. Trudy was upset that her hopes were raised only to have them dashed. Some TV news channels aired interviews with distraught parents. It was difficult for me to see Trudy crying on TV and begging for her son to be returned unharmed within 2 seconds. The bitch and the bastard got what they deserved. Of course, they probably wouldn't agree. Gradually, over the years, we heard less and less about the kidnapped Edwards boy. In our city, Jason looked so much like me that no one doubted that he was my son. Every now and then, someone would say he had Leila's eyes or ears, but mostly he looked like me. I was proud of my family. Leila remained sober and gained good weight. She was very attractive. Leila was no longer the emaciated ex-drug addict I had saved. Through her work and motherhood, she gained self-confidence and pride in herself. One night, after putting Jason to bed, she confessed to me that being Jason's mother saved her life. Whenever she was tempted to stray, she knew it would jeopardize her status as Jason's mother. The temptation disappeared. Leila doted on Jason. It became difficult for me to believe that she was not his real mother. They've definitely gotten closer. I was a little jealous, but Jason and I became buddies when he took up the sport. Although Leila and I were not married, the lovemaking between us was no worse than when I was married to my so-called true love. At the time, I thought, I hope this goes on forever. I think I jinxed myself. Jason was 13 years old when all this shit hit home. One evening, we were at home getting ready for dinner when I heard a bullhorn outside telling us to come out with our hands up. I looked out from behind the curtain. Every police car in town, a couple of state troopers, and what looked like an FBI car were parked in front of our house with lights flashing on their cars and people with guns pointed at the house. Jason asked what was going on, then I told him our story. He refused to believe that Leila was not his mother. I told him that she was actually his mother. but there was another woman who gave birth to him. The FBI called me on my cell phone, and I told them we needed a few minutes to talk to each other. He tried to persuade me to send the boy away first, but I refused. I didn't want some cranky cop to make a name for himself. He gave me a deadline. When the deadline passed, I told him that we had one demand, that they send a nurse to take a DNA sample from me and the boy. We would come out peacefully when they had the results. He said it would take too long to get results. I replied, "Cool shit. If you're the FBI, you can come up with something better." This idiot asked if I had a gun. I described in detail the .38 snub-nose pistol I used to shoot at my father's range. I just didn't tell them that he was still at my father's house. They agreed to my terms. DNA samples were taken. Soon after, an FBI official said there was a problem. The boy's mother and father arrived and refused to give their son's DNA sample for analysis, even though it had already been taken. He said he couldn't test it without his mother and father's approval. I told him that his father, that is, me, gave him permission. I made another call to gain leverage. Suddenly, reporters caught wind of this turn of events in the kidnapping story. They started asking Darren and Trudy if I was the boy's biological father. Although they vigorously denied it, it was too scandalous a story to escape publication and broadcast. Then I called on my cell phone until one of the reporters called me. I told him more about what happened to me. I told them about the false charges, the theft of my business and my wife, my time in prison and the kidnapping, or as I put it, returning my son to his father. I told them that I had tested the DNA before I picked up my son. I said that I would return the boy if he belonged to Darren and Trudy. As soon as the story came out, it exploded, despite being told as the kidnapper claims. There was tremendous support from the local community who had known us for about 12 years. They screamed at the police to allow DNA testing. A local lawyer agreed to petition the judge for testing, the judge whose lawn I mowed. The deal was done. The FBI would have investigated if I had released the boy and surrendered to them. Given the strong emotions and the danger this posed to Jason and Leila, I agreed to the deal. Jason left first. Trudy stepped out from behind the police car and ran over to embrace him. She shouted, "Brian! Brian!" his real name. He pushed her away from him when she approached and shouted, "You are not my mother!" Trudy collapsed to the ground in despair. The doctor began to examine Jason for injuries. He did not cooperate and shouted to the police, "Please don't hurt my parents." Leila came out next. Nobody knew what to think about her. Jason broke free, ran to Leila and grabbed onto her with all his might. Seeing this, Trudy began to sob even more. I think she thought it was supposed to be her hug. Everyone seemed to be crying, including people in the crowd. I waited until everything calmed down. I slowly walked out with my hands held high, shouting that I didn't have a weapon. I was ordered to stop and kneel with my hands behind my head. Suddenly, I realized that some things didn't make sense. Where was Darren? He should have been here comforting Trudy right now. The realization of the danger that threatened me and the bullet from his rifle struck simultaneously. I was unconscious. When I came to my senses, I raised my hand and jingled the handcuffs attached to the rails of my bed. The nurse called the doctor. He entered and said, "Welcome back to the world of the living." I didn't like it, and I told him so. I didn't want to go back to prison and be away from my son and my common-law wife. He said I should wait and talk to other people. A lawyer I knew came into my room. He said that he was the one who volunteered to represent me. You won't believe that all this happened. He was right. Darren was caught trying to leave the state and was arrested for attempted murder. He and Trudy were under investigation for false embezzlement charges brought against me. The company remained in the hands of the trustee trust until clear ownership was established. Leila took the initiative to introduce Jason Bryan to his birth mother and act politely towards her. I was so proud of her. Trudy admitted that she and Darren knew I was probably the father, especially after he was born. Darren and I are not very similar. Trudy's quick divorce and marriage was partly intended to convince others that the child was Darren's. The lawyer continued to smile. The best news is that the governor has commuted your sentence to a full pardon on embezzlement charges. You are no longer a convicted criminal. I'm trying to get the kidnapping charges dropped. I think I can boil it down to parental intervention. In addition, I have filed a lawsuit against Darren, Trudy, and the state for false accusations, arrest, and imprisonment. I saw dollar signs in his eyes. Hold off on this. I need to talk to Leila and Jason first. Fine. Just let me know when you want me to apply. Leila spent some time in prison for aiding a kidnapping. When it was determined that I had taken my child without the other parent's permission, the kidnapping charge against me was dropped, as was Leila's. Trudy allowed her to visit Jason. I was glad she did it. When Leila found out that I had woken up, she came to the hospital. She cried with joy when she saw me. This got me thinking. Finally, I said, "You continue to amaze me. I feel like the happiest person in the world." She smiled. "You're lying in bed with a bullet wound that almost hit your heart. You're handcuffed to the bed. There are still charges of parental interference being brought against you, and you can't mow lawns in this condition. What the hell makes you lucky? I have a wife and son." "You mean Trudy and Brian?" "No, you and Jason. I had problems calling him by his birth name." "Well, I guess I do fit the definition of your common law wife. I hope not for long. Leila, will you marry me? Are you sure, Andy? Or did you take too much medication? By the way, my real name is Julie. I'm quite sure. Whatever your name is." "Yes, but can we get married before you go to prison? If you go to prison, do you think Brian, would like to be my best man?" A voice from the threshold shouted, "You can rest assured I would do so, and you can call me Jason. You have the right. You are my father." He came up and hugged me, trying not to cry. "I understand that you were dating Trudy. How did everything go?" "At first I was angry because her husband shot you. I thought she might have been involved. Once I was convinced that this was not the case, it was just awkward for a while. She admitted everything. I know she's in a lot of trouble, but I hope she doesn't spend too much time in jail. I don't think she wants to talk to me. She doesn't think you'll want to talk to her. I'd really like to know why." The woman's voice was clear but soft. "Because I was selfish, stupid, and naive. Darren seduced me and convinced me that you were depriving us of our fair share of money. He was so dominant while you were, well, more submissive. It didn't take me long to realize what a mistake I had made. Before I knew it, Brian was taken from me, and that was all I could think about for years. Darren continued to give me hope that he would be found and returned to us. Divorcing him seemed too troublesome. We knew you were the father, but in our minds, he was our son. Part of me has been missing for years. No, wait. 2 parts of me have been missing for years. Now I've given them both back only to know they'll be taken away from me when I go to prison. I know. Commit a crime, serve time." "What do you think about Leila's work in raising your son?" "The more I learn about her, the more grateful I am for what she did. She's a real gem, Andy. Take good care of her." "I'm planning it." Trudy signed over her conservatorship to Brian Jason before going to prison. Leila and I were granted custody. We made sure that he visited her regularly. The only break in our visits to her was when Leila and I went on our honeymoon. I couldn't get used to calling her Julie. Darren was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder and making false accusations against me. It was not easy for him to get used to prison. After a couple of stab wounds, he committed suicide. His shares in the company were divided between Trudy and me in accordance with his will. Trudy gave me trust in her shares. I took over the company again. Leila became our financial director. I was proud when Jason said he wanted to work for me after college. When Trudy was released from prison, she took over as CFO of the company and still had her original shares, plus half of Darren's shares. Leila had more important responsibilities, being a stay-at-home mother to Jason's younger brother and sister. Trudy lived alone in a small house. She never went on dates, although there seemed to be a few men who hoped she would change her mind. Right now, she is focusing her attention on one particular young man who is about to go to college. She says she might be interested in another man later. Sometimes people ask me if I regret kidnapping my son and taking him away from his mother. I say, no, no, hell no. This was not just a kidnapping, it was a regular kidnapping. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.